here's what happened. So I go to bed, go to sleep. In my dream / vision, whatever, I dreamed that I was standing in a field, and it was nighttime, and I was looking at the expanse of the sky. I mean, I might have been in big sky country or something. I mean, there's no mountains, there were no buildings in front of me, just the horizon, the beauty of the heavens. It was breathtaking. Behind me, I could hear the sounds of life. I could hear horns honking, people talking, conversations. I couldn't make out specific words, but like multitudes of people talking, cheering, maybe they're watching a ball game. Heard babies crying, you know, not in terror or anything, just baby talk and crying and people talking. It was the sounds of life. I never turned around. I don't know if I was prohibited from doing that. I had no inkling to do it. I was looking at the expanse of the sky. Beautiful, beautiful night, hearing all of the sounds behind me of life, not a care in the world. Emotions began to kind of almost swirl, not like a fan, but I mean just kind of started moving like that. And then they started shifting positions a little bit. Then I can remember thinking, okay, something supernatural is going on. Now all this is happening in my mind as I'm watching. I'm still hearing the sounds of life. Then I hear the sounds of life behind me getting a little more panicked. It's like they're seeing it too, and they don't know what to make of it. I can remember that I didn't have a feeling of terror. I had a feeling of awe and wonder and thinking something is happening in the heavens. There's a shifting, there's a shattering, there's something is going on. Supernatural. And then the stars appeared, literally, to fall from the sky. Not just fall, but to be zooming towards the earth. At the same time that it looked like almost like a dimensional shift that was taking place. And then the streaking coming down, and then the sounds of life behind me. Holy terror. People were shrieking, screaming. You could hear people, oh my God, and and then sirens were going off and warning sounds, and it was like something cataclysmic was happening. I'm still watching it. It was happening so quickly, and I remember thinking, well, I don't have any fear in me. The next thing I know, there's a presence beside me. I'm not allowed to look, or I didn't look, but I was aware that I was in the midst, the arms of a presence, or in the midst of a presence, a personal presence. And the next thing I know, I'm just being lifted up, whisked up, and the next thing I know, it's like watching a Star Wars movie and warp speed. Everything just went, just into a streak and then to a flash of light, and boom, it was like we bursted through another dimension, if you will, a barrier of some sort. No fear ever. And I'm still aware of this presence, that we were under the control of a benevolent presence. And the next thing I saw was we busted through, I'm just going to call it a dimensional shift. We busted through another dimension. And before me was the most beautiful, it had to be what the earth looked like when it was first formed by the hand of God. The colors were so vibrant. The smells, the air smelled like potpourri. I can still smell it sometimes. I saw what looked like villages, beautiful, beautiful little homes, and flowers everywhere. You could hear children off in the distance just laughing, having a blast. People, the peace was overwhelming. The sun was just magnificent. And I can remember asking the presence, is this heaven? Is this paradise? And then I heard the voice, and it just said, this is where you will live forever. Welcome home. And I looked at my wife, she smiled, and I woke up. And but that happened to me. Now, it was so real and so profound. It was unlike anything. I thought to myself, before I share this with anybody, if I ever do, I'm going to give it some days and some weeks to see if it kind of goes away. You know how you can have a vivid dream and you think, well, I'll never forget that, and then 3 months later you don't remember anything. It's gone. Okay. So I just thought, let me just see if that happens. Well, the weeks went by, and all I could do was think about it. I mean, not all I could do, but often I would think about this and just kind of like go into ecstasy, just close my eyes and go, please let me go back, please. So I caught myself going to sleep at night, saying, Lord, could you take me back there? Just take me back there. But it had never happened. I never had anything like that before then. I've never had anything like that since share it. But here's what happened. Some years later, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years later, having coffee, my wife is there, and I said, I got to tell you something that happened to me. And I said, please don't think I'm crazy. And she kind of laughed, well, I already think that, you know. We've known each other since we were 10. So, I mean, we're great buddies. We're having a good time. And I said, so I told her just what I related to you. She's just spellbound looking at me. She didn't say a word. And I'm thinking she thinks I'm nuts. But when I finished, these were her words. She said, you need to ask your grandson about his rapture dream. She says, I said, what do you mean? What are you talking about? She says, he's coming this afternoon. And he had it years ago when he was just a little boy. I like maybe 3 or 4 years old. And now he's much older. She says, but he's coming this afternoon to the house. She says, I'm not going to say a word to him. And she said, when he walks in the door, sit him down and just say to him, his name's Parker. Parker, tell me about your rapture dream. And she said, I want you to just be quiet and listen to it. I said, okay. I didn't have it. I said, why are you being so mysterious about this? She said, you're going to love it. You need to ask him. And so I asked him, I said, he calls his grandmother Giggy. That's how he was trying to say grandmother when he was 1 year old, I think, and it just stuck. So I said, Giggy said to ask you about your rapture dream. Well, he kind of snapped his head around and looked at her like, is it okay if I tell him? And he looked back, he said, sure. And he said, I've never told it to anybody but Giggy. And I said, okay, well, she told you to tell me because I've got something to tell you. And he said, okay. First words out of his mouth. Well, Papa, he said, I was standing in a field. And I was looking up into the sky. Basically, he describes everything that happened to me. I mean, seriously. He said, he didn't call it the sounds of life. He said, I heard people behind me. He said, it sounded like a big city. But he said, I didn't turn around. I never saw it. I just heard it. And he said, but I'm looking at the sky. And he said, then the stars started moving. And I thought, how freaky is that? And he said, they started changing colors. And then he describes the whole thing, except he has more detail. He gets it right up to the point where everything's kind of, the dimensions are shifting. The sky is like streaks are coming down, like the stars are falling from the heavens. And then he says, but I realized, Papa, that these weren't stars, these were angelic beings. And he says, and we were swept up. And he said, I was swept up. And he said, it was like I was in some kind of like a chariot or something. And he said, and there was an angel that had his arms around the whole thing. He said, I saw him. He said, I talked to him. And he says, and then we were whisked. And he says, and you and Gigi were there, and I think he called it a couple of his mom, dad, people he knew. And he said, I saw their faces, and we're just going. But he said, but it wasn't a long trip. It was instant. And the next thing you know, he says, we're in, I forgot what he called it, paradise, I'm going to use the word, in this beautiful place, whatever a small kid would say. And he kind of describes it like me. And then he said, and then I woke up. And I said, and then my wife's over there now, she's got tears, and she said, I told you. She says, y'all had the very same dream. She said, that's impossible unless God's speaking. Well, this story gets more fantastic, as you know, because you heard it. So I'm listening to all this. I'm celebrating that. I said, have you told your mom and dad? They said, no. I said, do you mind if I tell them? He said, no, I don't mind at this point. So I told them. They were blown away by the whole. Then, about 5 or 6 years later, we're just getting on with life. I'm preaching. I'm doing conferences. My son comes with me. He's a grown man. You've probably seen him or met him. We are at a prophecy conference in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Great time. Conference center packed out. It's a big church, and so it's packed out. It probably held 1,000 people, and it was packed. Foyer is huge. They had our table set up for the speakers at the foyer. So I had just finished preaching, and I'm looking over the crowd. I'm tall, like you are, not as tall as you are, but I'm tall, and so I can see right over the crowd. And I see this young woman making her way through the back of the crowd, kind of snaking her way through, kind of sweetly pushing people aside, trying to get up front. And I'm thinking, and I see when she gets closer, she's crying. Not boo-hooing yet, but just tears, and her eyes are swelled. And I said, oh, bless her heart. She's got some heart issues here. She's wanting to talk to the preacher, you know. Well, she got almost down to the front line. She was standing a couple rows back looking at me, just kind of looking at me like she wanted to engage me. And then I saw her just kind of get discouraged, and she turned and walk back through, and I'm thinking, oh gosh, I wanted so bad to say, wait a minute, but I couldn't because I'm signing books and people were talking. But I'm watching all of this. And she goes out, and I watch her go out the foyer to the big front doors of the church, and she goes out. And I said, well, I'll never see her again. I said, Lord, I don't have a clue what that was about. And Brandon said something about, did you see that girl that left? I said, yeah, I saw it. I said, I don't know what that was about. And he said, yeah, I don't either. So we're going on. Well, anyway, after a while, the crowd's thinning a little bit, but about 15 minutes later, I'm just still looking over the crowd, talking to people. The door's open. I'm seeing people come and go. I see her again. And she comes in, and she starts kind of making her way through the crowd again, but it's much less now, so it's a lot easier. And I'm thinking, all right, now this time, I'm going to talk to her, because obviously something's on her mind. She finally gets up. She comes and stands on the side of the table, and I'm signing my last book here. She's, Pastor, can I talk to you? And she's still got swollen eyes and tears. She's wiping tears off her cheek. I said, yes, ma'am. I said, what's your name? She said, my name's Veronica. And I said, well, what's on your heart? I took her hand and said, what's on your heart? I said, something's bothering you. She said, he told me that I had to talk to you, that you had the answer for me, that you would know the answer to my question. Well, I had no clue where she was going, and so I wanted to be humble about it. I don't know everything, but if God told you, maybe I will know. And she says, it's about a dream I had, and God told me that you could interpret it. Now, so I'm ready. I said, well, just tell me and I'll tell you. I said, now, I'm not going to try to pretend like I know something. If I don't have a clue, I will tell you, and I hope it doesn't hurt your feelings. But I said, I don't jerk people's chains on that. If I don't know what it is, she says, okay. She said, I was standing in a field. When she said those words, I didn't know where she was going to go, but my son grabbed my jacket. He just kind of like, Dad, listen to this now. She says, and I was looking up in the sky, and I was looking at the stars. And when she said that, I mean, I'm about to break down. And I'm looking at her, and and then she starts describing the whole scenario. I hear the people behind me. I hear children. She said, I wasn't allowed to look. And she said, then the stars started moving. Now, my son Brandon, who's the father of my grandson, who knows all of that, he just says, he grabs my arm again. He says, oh my gosh, Dad. And Veronica stops and says, do you know what this is about? And Brandon said something like, he's had the same dream. And she goes, what? And I said, yes. Finish what you're saying. And she said, well, I'm almost finished. She says, so the stars come and they fall out of the sky. And then she says, and I just screamed, and I got on the ground and covered my head in the star, and then I woke up. And she says, what was that? She says, it was so real. This happened to me months ago. And she said, I told my husband, and we came to this conference. She said, I would need an answer to this. She said, it was so real, I can't get it out of my mind. And she says, you're telling me you had the same dream? I said, exactly, except my dream went further, and I know what it is. And she goes, oh my gosh, God did speak to me. You know. I said, Veronica, I know what the answer is to this dream. When I asked her, I said, why'd you leave? She said, well, I got scared. And then I couldn't get to you. And my husband and my children, she said, I've got little children, they're out in the car. She said, I went out there and just bawled. And my husband said, you must go back in. You must talk to him. God told you to. So she said, I finally got up the courage and came back. And she said, I'm so glad. So she says, what's the dream? And I said, it was the rapture. And I said, apparently, I need to talk to you about your relationship with the Lord, because apparently you were getting ready to miss it. Because you were, and she starts crying. She said, I've just given my life to the Lord recently. And she says, yes, I agree. She says, and I need to come back to the Lord. She said, I've been so far from the Lord. And she says, and that's all I can think is that God's trying to tell me something bad is getting ready to happen if I don't get right with Him. And she said, I feel like I need to be in ministry. She said, I don't mean preaching or teaching. She said, I just need to be investing my life somehow in the gospel ministry. And she says, and I said, well, let me tell you what happens after the stars fall. I said, those are not stars, those are angelic beings. And it was the rapture. And we do go up, and we bust through dimensions and barriers, like, and I said, and then the next thing you know, you're in paradise. And she said, oh my gosh. And I said, now let me tell you, I can't even describe to you what it smells like, what it looks like, what it sounds like. And she says, I knew it was probably had something to do with the rapture. And I said, well, yes. I said, that's all I can tell you. That's all I know. But I said, my grandson has had this exact same dream. I've had it. my wife, his grandmother, witnessed him telling it to her. Years went by. He tells it to me. I tell it to his mom and dad. We all go over it together, talk about it. And now more years have gone by. You come to me from Minneapolis, Minnesota, and you're standing here telling me the same dream and that God told you. I knew what it was. I said, so this is not a coincidence. This is God speaking. And then she said, well, I'm not really from Minneapolis. She says, I come from Peru. Thank you for sharing that, because now I know I'm not going crazy. See, there's no telling what God's speaking to people, his people, but people don't know how to share it with an unbelieving world. So that's my story.